So if you are thinking that risk is there, the answer is yes. Then I've got this secondary problem, and you've probably seen the database and seen my paper on this issue of tree risk. But we're losing about 5 people a year in Australia from accidental tree failure, and there's such small numbers. It's about 1 person every 5 million, compared with beds, which is 1 in 420,000. And no one has ever been able to tell me what the name of the profession is that inspects beds. So I assume that generally we consider the risk associated with the bed is small. And what we're really looking for is something that's unusual. And I think David Evans encapsulates it in the Valid materials with a 1-page thing of the trees that are of greatest concerns. So once you've done that, I think that at some stage or other, you need to try and benchmark that end risk, whether that be QTRO, whether that be Valid, or whether that be TRAC or some other system. I think the one drawback that I have with TRAC is that at the end of it all, the tree is low, medium, high, or extreme risk, but I'm not sure what that means.
It means that you need to do something, Mark, I think. And
yes, and in fact,
back to what my first experience with dealing with tree risk, and one of our colleagues had a conversation with me where he said that if you have a tree and it has a hazard, then you really need to do something, because if it fails and injures somebody and you haven't done anything about it, then you could be held to account, held at fault. And I thought that sort of made sense then, but since then I've changed my mind, and I don't believe that you do need to do something just because there's a tree risk.
And I think that's the point, Peter, is that we've had this culture that came out of the 90s that said you need to do something. You've seen there's an issue. First thing that we've got is this word hazard. A tree by definition is a hazard. It's stored biomass above ground. For that matter, planets are a hazard. Water is a hazard. Air is a hazard. Well, where do we stop? So when we're talking about the word hazard, even that word is odd. It's something that has the potential to cause harm. And I'm not suggesting that, a tree rocking in the ground or a tree that's actively splitting shouldn't be considered hazardous. I think it should be, but I'm not sure that I would consider any tree hazardous. And so the next question we get, and I've showed you before this wonderful thing called the Phlinus paradox, where you get white stem rot in a stem of many species of eucalypts, and it makes the tree stronger. So because we've got white stem rot, we call that a hazard. And then we say, well, what should we be doing? And I think what we don't answer, first of all, is this question of, is this really something that's going to significantly increase?
But that goes to the distinction between hazard and risk. So when we're looking at whether we should do something, that's a risk issue.
Yeah, yes and no, Peter, because if it's got a branch, let's say the tree's got a branch, that's a hazard.
But what risk does it pose? And that's the pertinent question.
Well, that's right. So the real question is, how much more likely is that hazard or that feature or that factor, how much more likely is that to fail than any other part similar to that or any other tree similar to that? And I'm not saying similar as having the same features, but similar as in, another Sydney blue gum, how much more likely is it that that branch will fail than every other Sydney blue gum branch? And this goes to the question of adequacy. And it's something that we don't talk about when we talk about hazards. We assume that trees, for example, with a hollow, and if you go to the DEC checklist here in New South Wales, a cavity is considered to be a defect. Well, yes, it is, but that's absolutely ludicrous because it's actually adequate. It doesn't have any effect on the tree at all. And in fact, it may end up making the tree stronger. So again, is that a hazard or a defect, as we like to use it? And that's this problem of our words that we choose.
It is, but there's a distinction between hazard and risk. So if there's a hazard, then the question is, well, what's the risk associated with that? And if the risk's acceptable, then we don't need to do anything. And if
precisely, yes,
we do. And that's the whole point. And people often get confused between those terms, and a lot of people have problems because they confuse those terms.
I think the secondary part, though, that of Peter, and that's what I was getting to, is that so if I'm looking at a cavity and a cavity has no real negative effect on a tree, then is it really a hazard any more than the tree itself is a hazard? In other words, you would ignore it, you'd treat it as anything else. And that's why we adopted the word factor, or feature is what Valid's adopted. And a factor or feature is something that has a significant impact on the likelihood of failure of that component or of the tree. So you've got this process where...
Is that what QTRA terms the
It's slowly getting there. It still uses a hazard because that's a standardly used term, and this is the problem. It's a standard used term that probably shouldn't be used.
There's no problem with using it if we could just educate everybody to understand the difference in those terms.
That's right. But if I look at the DEC checklist, a 10 millimeter diameter dead branch is considered to be a hazard. Well, yeah, in some circumstances I can imagine that, but in most circumstances, if I'm walking through a school and I see a 5 centimeter dead branch, I just walk past it. I ignore it. The DEC, fortunately, when Catriona worked with them on that, got that bit right, because they say we only want it recorded if it's greater than 10 centimeters in diameter. And that seems to make some intuitive sense, because as the branch slowly degrades, the weight gets less. And both QTRA and Valid look at that as being the process. So the question is, do I quantify risk? Let's ignore QTRA, let's ignore Valid. Do I quantify it? Yes, as far as possible. Do I benchmark it as far as possible? So I always try and give my clients...
What do you mean by benchmark?
Well, when I say that the risk of this tree is 1 in a million, what do I mean by one? What does that mean? People aren't good at numbers. People aren't good at understanding the context.
I would have thought that's an acceptable risk.
I would say that's getting close to the generally acceptable risk, 1 in a million. It's just on that cusp, but it's less than 1 in a million. So, if it came out at 1 in a million, it could be, 20,000 either side of that. So I'm fine with keeping it in that nebulous area. But what does that really mean? How can I communicate that to a person so that they understand? Well, if beds are 1 in 420,000 and it poses less risk of a bed, how do you feel about going to bed tonight? Do you feel comfortable, or is that unexpected? And so then I go to the extreme and I say, well, okay, how about driving a car? The risk of dying, so I look at mortality rather than other things, but the risk of dying in a car accident is about or in a vehicle accident, it's about 1 in 20,000 in Australia at the moment. I can halve that. I can get that down to 1 in 40,000. The government's been spending millions of dollars trying to figure out how to do this for decades, but I can do that. And it took me a while to figure it out, but I can do that really easily. Everyone from here on in is going to wear full face helmets when we're driving, because that'll at least halve your risk of mortality in a motor vehicle accident. And I'm sure you're all going to go out now. I've got 4 here in the office, and get yourself a full face helmet, racing helmet to reduce that risk. No, we don't. So, people already understand that 1 in 20,000 is not a good risk. We need to work on getting that smaller, but it's one that we're willingly happy to participate in for the benefits we receive, the ability to move around, grab things, do things. It just so happens that trees also provide benefits. And one of the things they actually provide is health benefits. So if you think about it, let's just say, and let me share my screen.
Oh, hang on.
Thanks, Peter.
Try it now.
Yeah. Yep, thank you. Hopefully you'll see my emails. Don't worry about them. We'll just go to a page. And I'm just going to open an Excel spreadsheet. Let's talk about the Department of Education here in New South Wales. And I know I pick on them for good reason. They make it so easy to do. They're not the brightest boys. So let's just assume that the average tree that got cut down in 2014 in schools had a canopy spread of, well, what's an average medium to smaller size tree? How wide would that be canopy wise?
6 to 8 metres wide.
So let's say 6 meters. Let's go the underside. So it's 3 times 3 pi r squared times pi, and that equals 28 square meters, roughly. 28 square meters. So let's make that easier. 28 square meters. And in the build-up areas, in the metropolitan areas, the value, the health value of a tree is about $11.20. But let's assume that we're not going to be there all the time. Let's just assume we're going to be in an area where the value of the average tree is, 28 is going to be $3 a square meter. So we really dropped the value down from the city because we've got country schools as well. So times 3. Okay, it's $84 a year of health benefits we're going to get out of that tree each and every year. Life-saving health benefits. That is, reduced Alzheimer's, reduced asthma, reduced heart disease, reduced suicide. There's a whole pile of these things that are now coming out with some wonderful research.
Sorry, Mark. Is that per person?
That's per tree.
Right, but $84 spread over the population of people.
Over the population. But let's
right.
No, the value of the tree itself. So we're valuing the health benefits of a single tree.
But $84 per tree of that size to the society, the local society.
Yeah, we picked smaller trees. We've assumed that all 9,000 of the trees that the Department of Education removed were quite small. It's done $750,000 worth of harm, and we've assumed really small sizes and really small numbers, so that after 7 years, well, we're more than 7 years now. Bridget Wright died in 2014, so we're a little over that. We've actually killed a person as a result of all those trees. That's equivalent to a life lost, a little bit more, about 1.2 lives lost, in reducing all those hazardous trees. And so the net result is, for an accident that the coroner said was unavoidable, the New South Wales Department of Education spent $30 million the first year, and over a period of 7 years has hurt people as a result of the decision to manage and try and reduce a risk that the coroner said was unavoidable. Now, I don't know.
That assumes that there's no replanting, doesn't it?
It does and it doesn't, Rob, because let's go the other side. I've used very small sizes, 6 meter radius. Most trees are probably larger than that. And whilst there will be some replanting, to get to that size is a loss. And then the assumption is there shouldn't have been the replanting on top of keeping up the trees. That is, those trees were all cut down because they posed an unacceptable risk. All 9,000. You must have asked how many people were dying each day in schools in New South Wales based on those numbers. It just doesn't make sense. So I think being able to put a context and a number on things makes sense when we do. So I think most of you will have seen it, but I can probably pull it up quicker than I can pull it out of my files. Oz tree deaths. So we try and give all the time figures that'll help people get a context for what we're talking about. And here's some. Melanoma, 1 in 13,500. Risk of death per annum in Australia. Driving, 1 in 20,000. Asthma, 1 in 60,000. Murder, 1 in 100,000. Falling on or from a bed is 1 in 420,000. Animals, 1 in 830,000. Odd to believe, but horses, dogs, and cows kill 3 times more people each year than trees. Just does not make sense that we're as fixated on trees. But falling involving a chair. So when we go back and we said that tree was 1 in 100,000, 1 in a million, that gives you a context. It's about as often as someone's going to die from sitting on a chair and leaning back like we occasionally do and standing on them like we occasionally do. It's about the same level of risk. You know, where does that fit? Well, it's a big chunk. It's 50 times smaller than driving a car. Now I've got some context to it. So when I say putting it into context, that's what I mean. Letting people understand what that means, because to a lot of people, a risk of 1 in a million may still seem big, may still seem unacceptable. So I try and find ways of communicating that allows people to understand and put that in its context. Does that make sense? And regardless of QTRA valid or track, my argument is that at the end, we really need to have it in a context, and the context that I like best of all is the tolerability of risk framework, which is, you know, things that are smaller than 1 in 10,000 as a risk are okay. Risks that are 1 in 10,000 and larger are things that we want to try and be really focusing on. And when you get down to a risk of less than 1 in a million, essentially you're going to ignore it. Does that help answer the questions, Andrew?
Yeah, I was just mainly after your experience, if you've actually used QTRA before.
Yeah, quite a bit. I'm actually a QTRA trainer. I'm the only one here.
Oh, okay. Yep.
So, and I like the process of QTRA because I like numbers. Now, Peter, on the other hand, Peter is not as mathematically numerate. Would that be a fair comment?
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. So I typically use Valid because you can punch some information into an app and it'll generate a report. And the basic idea behind both of those systems is the idea of getting a value for your target. So how often is somebody or something going to be where the tree is likely to fail? Well, how big is the part that's likely to fail, and what's the likelihood of that happening? And you multiply those things together and you come up with a probability of harm. So both systems do it. They do it slightly differently, but it's still that process. So I think that either of those systems is good. I just have a preference for Valid because I can stand there, punch it into my phone and get a report that I can email.
And I'm more of a control freak. I like to see how it's all happening. The app makes me feel a little bit more uncomfortable, and pressing buttons is not my thing. Peter wears glasses all the time. You know, some of you haven't had it, like Mark hasn't had it happen to him yet, but he'll get presbyopia yet. And all of a sudden that iPhone screen starts to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And then you say, well, I need to carry around an iPad, or I need to wear glasses. And if you're wearing glasses normally, that's fine. But if you wear reading glasses, then out in a sight, you've got to constantly be putting them on and taking them off. And I just can't deal with that. So those are the two things.
And there is a slight difference in the outcomes as well. If you assess exactly the same tree using both systems, sometimes you'll get a slightly different answer.
Yeah, although that's pretty rare, I'd have to say.
The difference is pretty small, but there is some difference in how they deal with those things.
Yeah, and I'd have to say that if you follow the guidelines on track, and that's the big problem with any system is following the system. The number of reports that I get to review that I sit there and think, did they not read the instructions? You know, track says, for example, a imminent likelihood of failure is something you'll seldom see. So when I go to a school and I find 38 trees in the school that are all listed as imminent risk of or imminent likelihood of failure, I'm sitting there thinking, hang on a second, you know, what is it? Has they all been lopped at the same time and they've all got big branches with cracks in them? Or no, they had dead branches. You know, I'm not sure that that's going to be imminent. What really made that odd was at the end of it all, this was a high security school where the students aren't able to get out of the classroom and hallways. They're all caged in. So nobody ever gets to get underneath these trees except one person, the general assistant. So it didn't make sense. So here, the application had the occupation rate was constant. There's no school's constant. At the best, they're frequent, but well, that's not true. Some areas may be constant in a school, but the bulk of the school grounds will be occasional to rarely.
So it's the problem. One of the problems with track is understanding what those terms mean and getting agreement amongst different people that they're all talking about the same thing. Because when you tell me that the likelihood is high, what's that mean?
And I've suggested 3 alternate words to low, medium, and high. We just started using the words yellow, slippery, and wet. We wouldn't do it because they're meaningless. It would be stupid. And yet, because we've used ordinal words, that is words that go in a sequence, it makes it sound like it's good. Low, medium, and high. Then the next thing is, and again, David Evans does a pretty good job of critiquing some of these anomalies. We then come up with this time frame. We say, well, this is urgent, so this tree needs to be taken care of within a week or a month. And then this is high, this needs in the next 3 months or whatever it might be. You sit there and think, well, that's only 3 months of difference. Is that risk 1/3? That seems to be very specific. And so once you start adopting the tolerability of risk framework, you sort of say, well, extreme risk you need to deal with, that's down in that 1 in 10,000 or greater. The tolerable range, which is somewhere between 1 in 10,000 and 1 in a million, that tolerable range then becomes something that you ask the question, is this as low as reasonably practicable? And that's a term we should all be familiar with because it's covered in our work health and safety legislation. And by that, it doesn't mean, is there anything practical we can do to solve this? What it means is if we balance up the risk, the potential outcome, the resources available, what is a reasonable thing to do? What would a reasonable person do? Now, there's a point to which we don't know that answer, but it comes this lovely little thing that quantification of risk looks at, and that's the value of statistical life. And I just pulled up the page here. It's available as a government sheet. And here we are for 2022. It was 5.3 million. This is the Office of Prime Minister and Cabinet that puts this out. There's a lovely thesis that goes with it. Riveting reading. I enjoyed it. Those of you who don't like maths, it's a little bit boring and it's probably not as nice as I think it is. But at $5.3 million, now we can start making decisions. Do we put a traffic light in or not? Do we send you out that little package that you get to poke the poo of with a stick? Do we send that out past the age of 74 or not? And the answer is no, we don't. 74, we say, yeah, Rob, tough luck, mate. If you don't want to pay for it yourself. It's you've got to be able to make a decision so that this value of statistical life is set there. It's interesting. The author that wrote the thesis that this comes from suggested that it's probably not as big as it should be, but society can't afford much more than that. That is, if we're going to be a responsible society and we're going to manage risks in priority, then you can't put a value on a life much more than that. Otherwise, you would not be able to cope with getting all the things done that you needed to. And so that tells you that if we accept a risk that's 1 in a million or smaller, that a risk that poses a risk of harm on average of $5.30, let's just round it to $5. $5 is not worth dealing with. So if my risk is posing, let's say it's 1 in 100,000, it's going to pose $50. How much would be reasonable to spend to reduce a $50 risk?
Let's say it's unreasonable to spend $1,000 or $2,000 to reduce it.
Without question. And it's probably unreasonable to spend much more than 10 times, except if the risk is likely to increase over time. And that's one of the reasons why a dead branch is a problem, because the risk associated with the dead branch is going to go up for a while. And then it's going to start dropping back down again as little bits fall off and weight starts to reduce and more bits fall off. So, you know, if you've got a dead branch that's posing a risk of harm of 1 in 100,000 in a school playground, how much money would you spend to stop it? You wouldn't spend $1,000. And you'd probably be barking up the wrong tree to say that $500 was reasonable. And $50 is probably going to be towards that upper end. So that's the advantage of looking at it in a context of what we call the tolerability risk framework, because it's a holistic approach that allows you to compare and think about risk as a whole and how society is willing to accept or not accept those risks. The dilemma with something like TRAC is at the end of it all, I get a low risk and then it says to me, what mitigation options do you recommend? Of course, there's always something you can do to mitigate. And then at the end of it all, what's the risk? Low. I scratch my head at that and I think.
So you've spent some money to reduce a low risk and acceptable risk to a low risk.
Yeah, it makes no sense. The good thing is it comes out with low and it's really hard to get away from a low. So when I see a medium, I immediately go to the mediums in the charts or the reports and I have a look and I think, they didn't follow the instructions in the training manual. When I get to the high, I'm sitting there thinking, boy, I want to see the tree, or it's probably not been followed, and almost inevitably it's not followed. I get excited when I see a tree that is would come out as moderate or high using TRAC. Let me just give you an example. I got called out to a site the other day and they wanted a risk assessment done for a site, and I said, fair enough. So this is outside the front of a car dealership in Castle Hill. It's a partial failure. Can you see that? Is it bright enough, guys?
Yeah, that's fine.
Whoops, the Phalaenus again. And my response was, I can't say that tree is dangerous enough to allow it to be removed under the exclusion of dead, dying and dangerous. That is, I know there's an increased risk. It's not significant enough that I want to make the decision. Now, a smart decision to make on this tree is removal. It's partially failed. It's probably got no great life expectancy. But how long do you think that it's been sitting like that for?
What's the target for it, Mark? There's some
yeah,
power lines not far away.
I love Google photos. There it is. It's going to take me to the spot. We'll have a look. Knows where. See, there we are. There's the tree. It's even got that good with it. And so it's outside a car yard. Very busy road. You know,
but it wouldn't reach the road.
There's the tree there. No, the driveway is really the target. And you're absolutely right, Peter. The risk is small enough that I would ignore it. I would get rid of the tree for management reasons rather than for risk reasons. And I think that's where our industry needs to go, and that is it needs to start to separate out those two terms quite clearly. That is, there's a whole pile of management things we can do to get a better canopy, have better trees, but they're not risk related. They're simply making good decisions. And we make good decisions. For example, a car's getting old and worn, it's having some issues. We say, well, it makes good sense now to get a new car. We don't say, oh, I need to get a new car because this car is dangerous. We say, yeah, we've got some problems. So yes, this is already failed here in 2020. And I love this function in that you can go back and start saying, well, how long ago did that fail? And can't always get to see it. But there we are. They made, whoops, gone up too high. Sorry, guys. Yeah, you can get to go back and check these things. And I'm surprised at how often I'll get out there and see something that I think, oh boy, they should be doing something, and it's been there for a decade. And that's not saying that I wouldn't remove it. As I said, I'd remove that tree and I'd remove that tree. This has got Phalaenus, it's Garparia, and it's acting as a moderate pathogen, which it tends to do scoparia, so it'll end up needing to be removed. And I would probably play it with something like Lophostomus convertus, the next tree along. Seems to be doing well in the area. Does that help put it into a context of that question for you, Andrew?
Yes, it does. Thanks, mate.
Okay, great. So dealt with that one. Want to get back to some of the other bits. Now, I'm very aware, Vicky, that you asked me a question and I didn't respond to it last time around. Can you remember what the question was?
Was it the one about financial responsibility, like on the developers? If the tree dies or the tree gets injured?
Yeah, okay, good. So who's responsible for damage to property? This is a really iffy area. First of all, did the developer do things as they said? So if we're talking about damage to a neighboring tree, and the consent authority approved it, did they do what they should have done? So it's not uncommon for me to get to development sites and see things like the grade is 300 mils lower than it should have been. I can never figure out how that happens, but it happens. Anyone else have that issue? Yeah, Peter?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the first one. Assuming that there's a decision made to protect the tree, and then that hasn't been done correctly, technically speaking, the person that hasn't taken appropriate care of the tree in that process or has harmed the tree is negligent, and there'd be a duty, there'd be a tort available against them, either for what's called a either what's called a misfeasance or a non-feasance or a malfeasance. So, and they're based on what the situation was behind what happened. So if they should have done something and they didn't, that's different than if they sit there and say, well, stuff the tree, I don't care, I'm going to go cut that. And if it dies, tough luck. Those are two different things, but the end result is the same, and that is somebody should be held responsible. The reality, having said that, Vicky, is that I don't know of an instance yet where somebody has been held responsible for malicious damage to a tree. And when I say malicious, I say intentional things like jumping the fence and cutting it down or poisoning it. There was a person who was convicted in Blacktown Court for a breach of the Pesticides Act. He was fined $20,000 for poisoning the neighbour's trees. But it wasn't, that was for breaching the Pesticides Act. It wasn't for the damage he caused the trees, if that makes any sense.
I'm aware of a couple of instances in Byron where people have been prosecuted for illegal tree cutting and removal.
But it's of someone else's trees, and if so, is it just under the Environmental Planning Assessment Act?
It was the council tree, and I'm not sure what act they were prosecuted under.
Yeah, I suspect that what would have been is removing a tree without consent, which is very different than a criminal act. And in New South Wales, Section 195 of the Crimes Act comes to play, and it says that it's a criminal offence to maliciously damage any other property not herewith mentioned within the Act. And so that covers trees, except if you're cutting it down for firewood. And then that's a whole different thing. You're then stealing it. And that was recently changed. I think only a few years back, there was an offence of cutting down green firewood or live tree for firewood and dead tree for firewood. Now it's anything for firewood. So if it wasn't just cutting it down for firewood but getting rid of it, then it's a criminal offence. And I don't know of a prosecution under that. So
we've got quite a few development sites where there's conditions of consent in terms of tree protection, and then the developers just don't care and they just do anything. They excavate beside it, they don't do tree protection, they don't put the mulch down, like they don't do everything. We've got one in Georges River Council at the moment, and then they only get fined $6,000, so they don't care.
Yeah, and they've learnt that. And what they have learnt, Vicky, is that first of all, they've learnt that arborists don't know anything, and I say that genuinely. If you take a well-seasoned builder that's been around for 30 years, he's been messing around with trees and tree root systems for 30 years, and he goes back past some of his old buildings. You know, someone like Harry Triggerboff is definitely aware of his original building, Merton Apartments. And they say, well, I went really close to that tree and it didn't die, and it's 30 years later. And that dumb arborist told me that I had to be 12 times trunk diameter, and I only went 4 times trunk diameter, and look at the tree today. And so for a lot of builders, what they see is, and particularly smaller builders, as you get to the tier 1s, it starts to change, tier 2s again. But the average, you know, smaller builder is sitting there saying, I've got to get this paperwork signed, it's got to be done, and then that's it. I really don't want to do the rest.
I think they've got a point though, Mark. We look at what the standard says and get ourselves in and not over it, but in fact, trees are very resilient. And, you know, that people look at what the standard says and assume that it's prescriptive or try and make it prescriptive, but it's actually not.
No, but it's that has then had an impact, and it's I get why we want to try and protect the trees and give as much space as possible, but they've learned, and it's very hard now, you know. So that's the first issue. The second issue is it's up to the consent authority to take action if the conditions of consent aren't complied with. I'm not sure how that happens with complying development. That's outside of my understanding of how that process works. But outside of complying development, I'd like to tell you about a site. I can, Susan Street, let me pull it up and show you. Susan Street in Auburn. And the arborist report said inspect every week, report every month. And in this particular case, they got inspected every month and reported every quarter. And so, you know, every month I would inspect, every quarter I'd say, look, guys, you've got to do something about this. You've got crap building up under the tree, and, you know, you've got things that are wrong. So if I can, that's the tree there, lovely tree. Peter, you're familiar with the tree.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. And so we go back. We can go back quite a way. I think we go back even more than that. Yep. So originally, originally this was a tree in an open flat edge car park, and they've taken half the tree off. They've built this structure, and in the process, you can see them actually during the construction here, half the tree has been cut out. Canopy went from about 50% canopy density to 100% canopy density for a whole pile of other reasons. But the point that's interesting is, at no stage did I ever get a call from the council saying, hey, where's that development site report? Now, that is the council car park. So we are clear on each other. That is the council chambers. That means walk out the back door and say, guys, something's not right here. We need to get this together. Where's the report? So that's inevitably going to happen, even for big organizations. It's rare, and I think I mentioned this previously, probably 1% of the development site reports I do result in me going out to the site, maybe 2, you know, with small numbers, and implementing the stuff. And then when I attempt to implement the stuff, and again, I don't know how your experience is, Vicky, or anyone else's, but I say, here's the fence, this is where it should be. You know, we draw it all up with a plan, we show them where things are to be, and you go out to the site and you do the sign off, the initial sign off, and then things somehow rather rapidly change. Has anyone else found that process?
Oh, it's pretty normal.
It's normal.
Yeah. And so on this particular one, Susan Street, I got there one day and I see all these bruises across the root system. And I said, what happened? They said, oh, well, we had to get an excavator in. So we just simply tracked the excavator across the roots. And so the excavator bruised the top of all the roots. Now, again, it would have taken nothing to say, look, let's put down some mulch and some track mats and you can track it back through there without any problems. That's how they ended up taking it out in the end. But again, it's just a tree. And it's just a tree because what's the consequence, as you say, Vicky? It's a $6,000 fine. And then the other side, and I'm happy to be, and anyone listening in later, I'm happy to take the abusive emails. But, you know, when you go to a site and you say, well, look, they're going to dig all the way past this. This is 2 times trunk diameter away from the wall. I went in, I explained to the builder what he needed to do, how he needed to cut, how he needed to finish off the cuts after he'd dug or during the digging process. And I didn't go out and spend 3 days watching. You know, if it's going to cost them 3 days of my time watching, that's going to be really expensive. What I said is, if there's anything that doesn't fit the pattern, give me a call back. You know, once I've seen you dig past a few roots, cut them off, I'm fine. You know what to do. And so I'm not trying to add extra billable hours into a project like this. I'm trying to get that building built and the tree retained as cost effectively from an arboriculture perspective as possible. And I got a call the other day, I can't say who from, said, look, I've just been asked to go have a look at a site where you've just done a report. And I said, yep, that's fine. And I knew full well that after about 15 minutes of the conversation, he was going to say, you haven't mulched yet, demolition's taking place. And I'm saying, why bother? You're going to pull out pathways and everything from the tree protection zones, just keep the machines out of that zone. And then I knew he was going to be there for the whole day. And I thought, I'd have been there for maybe an hour in the morning, an hour in the afternoon, just to grab some shots and said, in the meantime, if you've got an issue, give me a call, I'll come on back. I don't want to be on site, just standing, watching and doing things. Now, if you do that, that's fine. I accept that. But it's for me, it's not the aim of the game to try and increase my billable hours, is to try and get trees retained without people saying, oh, I don't want to do that because it's going to be too expensive. And that would be the result I'd get most of the time, is I don't want to spend any money on trees. I don't have to. If I get an arborist in, you know, to do an inspection once a month, it's going to cost me $500, $600, $700. And then he's going to find things wrong with the site where Mark said he's got to put the fence. It's not going to be there. So, you know, 20 inspections, this is, you know, 10 grand's worth of stuff. Just, I'll give him a call at the end. And in fact, I won't call Mark because he's going to say, you didn't do what you meant to do. I'm going to call Rob up, Rob Murray. He's a nice arborist. I'm going to say, Rob, can you come out and have a look at the trees, see how they look, and write me a report saying they're okay, they are, they're not, let me know. And Rob gets out there having no idea what was there beforehand, looks at the trees and he says, yeah, they're looking healthy. And the sad thing is, or the good thing is, in 10 years' time, they're probably looking healthy. I'm amazed at how well trees will survive construction damage, particularly if you do one thing.
Give them a bit of water.
Water. The whole thing about root cutting is I'm stopping the water being taken up. I'm removing absorbing roots. If I add water, I do 2 things. I increase the development of new absorbing roots in the remaining root system, and then I make water easier to take up. And you can imagine if there's more water, it takes less energy to take that water up. It's an easier process. So,
Mark, can I ask, what about tree bonds? I know that NWA, I hear they ask the developers to put a tree bond per tree, and they don't get it back until the end when all the trees are okay.
yeah, look, one of my favorite places, I think it's called Greenpoint Arcade in North Sydney.
Oh, yeah.
That had a bond back in the 1980s of $250,000 a tree. And that would have been just a promissory note, you know, financed through a bank, but it certainly made them very aware that they shouldn't damage the tree. So I think bonds are nice from that point of view.
I believe they do that quite a bit in the city of Melbourne, where they're developing in the main city centre.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
look,
all the street trees in the city of Melbourne have a bond paid before development starts.
yeah, in New South Wales, we've had some issues, and one of them is, rightfully so, the then Chief Commissioner, Senior Commissioner, Tim Moore, pointed out that there's opportunity already under the Act to prosecute for breaches, and therefore that's the way we should be going rather than asking for a bond. And so he held that a bond was not permissible and shouldn't be done. Now, that said, frequently developers will say, I'm going to pay the bond, rather than delay this, put a second application in the Land Environment Court and go through the whole process again. So councillors are fairly well about, can we talk about how Mark stores and labels his photos in Google Lens? Yes, you can. Yeah, people will accept that that's just a part of it. But in most cases, the bonds aren't that bad. And again, in most cases, it doesn't take a lot to keep trees alive.
Mm.
It's not a complex process. And as I read arborist reports, I often think that for some, that is a complex process. That is, the arborist needs to be on site for 50 hours during the development. The arborist needs to be there once every week. And there are sites where I want to be every week. Do not take me the wrong way. If they're getting really close to a significant tree, it's going to matter, and it's not going to take a lot to go out. But there are many sites where I'm happy being there once every month, and I've got some sites where I ask for once a quarter, and I still can't get once a quarter. That is 4 visits during the development. That's not a lot to look at cost-wise. It maybe add $1,000 or $1,500 to the development costs. So hopefully that answers that.
Yeah, thanks very much.
So yeah, theoretically, liability falls with the person that's negligent or malicious if it's done intentionally. So, a neighbour, and I can think of one at the moment that's in QCAT. I had a long conversation about today. The neighbour wants to put a driveway past the hoop pine. If he digs to 150 mils to put his driveway in, well, he's probably being reasonable. If he dug to 500 mils to put the driveway in and in the process ripped all the roots, he'd probably be being unreasonable and malicious. It'd probably arguably, if it was New South Wales, arguably malicious damage. And malicious damage in New South Wales under the Crimes Act covers not just doing it with the intent of doing it, but doing something without caring what happens. And I talk about a case that one of the classes went to with me, Miss Booty. We can't tell you the name of the case because that's not permissible. But Miss Booty was in a store. She'd been caught shoplifting there before, but this time she definitely wasn't. She has an altercation with the checkout person. She grabs his glasses, which are sitting on the counter, and throws them on the floor. Doesn't break them, doesn't damage them. But a shopper walking around doesn't see them and stands on them and breaks them. The fact that she threw them on the ground without caring what the consequences were made it malicious. So the damage then was malicious, and that's it. So didn't even have to intend to break them, just the fact that she did something that wasn't responsible. Nick, you want to know how I store stuff?
Yes, please. Looks like you've got a good system going in there where you can go back and look at older photos and that, which I think could be pretty helpful.
So I use Google Photos, and I've recommended that before. It's just an external backup. In terms of my on-computer storage, I file by the month. And I use Dropbox to change the file to the date, so I can look for it by file number or by date.
Don't change the name of each picture.
It does. I use Dropbox to do that for me automatically. So
automatic. Cool.
goes through and automatically changes it to the date and time. So I can see them in sequence. Let me show you. Easily dealt with. So my photos are then stored. So some are put out for different things, court props, thing on conifers, but most of them go by date.
Yeah.
And by date, if I go to 2022 and June, those were all the images, and you'll see the dates are all based on the file. So it was on the 1st of the 6th of the 1st of the 6th, 2022, and it's taken at 9:02:09 a.m. And the reason I do that is I've got a diary. And so when I say, where was that or when was that, it helps answer that for me. The other thing is when you share your images in Google Photos, your metadata goes across, all sorts of other things goes across. So when I'm in Google Photos and I open up Google Photos, now I went to Castle Hill yesterday. And well, there it is. Even with a spelling mistake, it figured out that I wanted to look at trees from Castle Hill. And so the last, like yesterday, there we are. Oh, and Wednesday, yep, there we are. And, the 24th of December, and so on and so forth. Now, we're just talking about trees and getting close, and it just so happens that these came up. These are two trees. That's a Teratocornis, and that's a Eucalyptus eugenioides by the looks of it. And someone's excavated fairly close to those. Would you agree?
Mm.
What do? Do you cut the trees down because somebody's excavated close? And that's 1 times trunk diameter of that for both those.
If you wait for a couple of years, the tree will grow new roots.
Yeah, and in fact, I had the landscape architect on the phone really cranky with me because I was supporting this action. And I said to him, you haven't been to the site, have you? Because that work happened 3 years beforehand. It's already excavated, and the new retaining wall's coming another 1.5 meters out from that excavation.
It's interesting that the trees next to the cut seem to be quite happy, but the one further back's dead.
And I mean, again, it's trees for you. They're, every time I think I've got them figured, I had them confound me. So, yeah.
So if you had that tree at the back, if it was next to the cut, you'd think that you'd be inclined to say, oh, well, you shouldn't have done that cut because you killed the tree.
Yes. And then that was what the landscape architect was chiding me for, is, even thinking that you could get that close. And I'm saying you're already 1 meter closer than is proposed in the plans. You're going to have to backfill. And, this is this process of how close can we get? And if you want to know the answer to that, and I tell people all the time, one of the best resources you can have as a consulting arborist is a camera. When you are driving around, have a look at the idiots that are getting really close to trees. Have a look at the development sites where they're doing things that they shouldn't be doing, and photograph them. Now, if you're photographing, and I will make it clear, I use most of my shots now on the iPhone. I have a couple of really nice Olympus TG cameras that have a built-in microscope that's wonderful, but almost everything is now on an iPhone. And it gives a GIS coordinate on the meta file. And so I can go back to that spot, and let's just give a quick look here. There it is down the bottom. I hit on the little bit down the bottom, and it takes me exactly to where I was standing. Well, plus or minus 10 meters accuracy, guys. It's an iPhone. But here we are, and there I am. I can, they've put in, and this is before that. This is an older shot. When are we talking about? It says 2023, but that's not 2023.
Can you show me how to do that again, Mark?
Sure. When you open up if you're sharing your location, and I do with Google Photos, I share my location. Let me get this to the other side so it's easier for you to see. So in, and I'll take it right back out. Whoops. Escape. Escape, 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 escape. Where's escape on a keyboard? I never use it.
Top left.
Yeah, thank you. So when I'm wanting to know some information, so the information can be hidden in Google Photos or shown. So I want my information to show, and it tells me a whole pile of things. So Apple iPhone 11 Pro, so you can see I'm a poor arborist. I don't have a new phone. It tells me it's backed up. It tells me what suburb it is. It's northwest. I would put in Castle Hill, and it figures out that's close enough to Castle Hill that it's Castle Hill. I think that's pretty neat. And then it gives you this little a pointer. It says that's roughly where you were when you took that shot. If you just press on that little pointer, and it says that's it, add on the layers on Google Photos, and there I am. Google Photos is an interesting piece of software. The whole Google Earth thing. If you haven't seen it, there's a wonderful doco on it. It was essentially stolen, and so a part of what Google does wonderfully is decides, because it might have been a little bit dubious, is they make it free, and that whole process is free, and I think that's wonderful. So you get a lot of information, and if you haven't found it yet, Google Earth Pro also has a lot more historic images, and it's free. Just an app that you download, Google Earth Pro, and you can. Some areas, in Sydney, it's taking the images almost as often as near maps. Not the same resolution, but again, it gives you useful information. Was there a tree protection fence there? Wasn't there? When was the tree cut down? When did the tree start to die? There are all sorts of questions that you might want to look at historic images for.
Thank you.
That's okay. So that's the things. It's clever. When I say it's clever, there are other things that it'll do. It's not that smart yet. The algorithms aren't that great, but they're getting there. Google Lens finds things pretty well. But in terms of using the internal algorithms in your photos, it's not as good. But if I said oak tree, now it knows roughly what an oak tree looks like. It'll get fig wrong with it fairly regularly. But there we are. It's figured out that's an oak tree. Thinks the ironbark's an oak because the bark's like it. Thinks of figs like it. But then that's cork oak. There's no questions about that. That's New South Wales' biggest cork oak, Tenterfield. So is it going to get it right all the time? No, they're definitely oak trees. That's definitely an oak. So there's all sorts of things. I did a presentation a few years back on fungi, and rather than trying to search through every photograph, I thought, let me just start by asking Google to find my fungi. And does it get it right all the time? No, but boy, there's enough fungi there to start doing bits and pieces. And in fact, I did the entire presentation, I think, with the exception of 3 shots, just purely on what it pulled up for me when I asked it to find me fungi. So it's getting fairly good as an algorithm. It's not perfect. Then some other things that I make notes on, and it tells you in your photos, there's a note, that's that 3 little lines there. I don't know whether you can see that. And yeah, that tells me there's a note there, and that tells me here, if I go get you over the other side, that I've added the note cladoptosis. And the reason that's there is if I'm looking for a shot that shows cladoptosis, I can just type that in, and Google's not smart enough to know what cladoptosis is yet. Give it another 10 years and it will be. What it really is freaky at is identifying faces, and it uses a facial recognition software that I find freaky. I can't tell the younger kids apart, but if I go, again, digital photographs fairly recent, if I go to my grandchildren, KOBI, Kobe, it figured all these out by himself. This is young Strapper now, but if I go back to when he was a baby, I've not put his name on the file. It recognizes that's him from the baby, from the facial recognition software.
Wow.
I can't do that. I mean, I'm hopeless with faces to start off with. my wife and my daughter can usually figure those things out. And I can hear from the date, but Google figured that out and said, yes, that's Kobe. Isn't that freaky?
That is freaky.
If they ever allowed you to do it neatly, it would allow you to find public images. So, for example, if I'm watching a movie and I took a picture of Clint Eastwood, it would allow me to type in Clint Eastwood and find it. It won't do that yet. And I don't think they will, because I think there's some issues with privacy and how that would work. I would like to. It'd make my life a lot easier, because there's lots of people I see and I've got no idea who they are. I'm just hopeless. So it would make it easier. So yes, does that answer your question on use of Google Photos as a storage system?
Yeah,
Yes.
it does pretty good.
And I use it. Also, don't store everything stored on my computer. I use it as a backup drive, and when I'm anywhere, rather than trying to find lots of photographs, I'll go through. It's hard to mark everything up. You see, I should have partial failure, inclusion factor. But the fact that I've gone through and put that into a lot of things means I can go back to here, type in factor, FACTOR, and it will give me a whole pile of bits and pieces like that that I can look at. And so with a little bit of maintenance, you can get lots of valuable information.
Wow, that's really cool. Thanks for that.
Okay. Yeah, no, it is. And for the first, I'm going to go off, I think it's the first 20 gigabytes or something like that of storage. It's free.
Yeah.
I now pay each year about $30 to have it backed up there, but it means that anywhere I go, I know what my access codes are for accessing it. I can log in on anyone's computer and, start pulling out pictures. So when I'm working either abroad or in interstate doing training, and someone says to me, well, what about, I'd rather that than trying to search my database, even though I'm using solid state drives.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, very good. Cheers.
Okay. Now, let's go back. So does it fall on developer or builder? Yes, good luck. I think they should pay more often. One of the best ones I ever went through, Vicky, I got there and it was a Eucalyptus Terra Cornus in Holroyd, or was Holroyd Council back then, Marylands. The builder had put in water 300 mils from the base of the tree on one side at 500 mils in depth. And the other side, he'd put electricity, again at about 500 mils. And so the tree was essentially stuffed. The client said to me, what do I do? And I said, well, good luck. I'd ask the builder to pay for a replacement tree. But how often do you think that's going to happen? Who has seen a tree, a car go off the road and smash into a tree, a small tree, knock it over? Something that maybe 20 centimeters in diameter, 15 centimeters in diameter. Anyone ever seen that?
Seen more than one or two.
Yeah, okay. How much do you think the insurance companies pay the tree owner for that tree?
Nothing.
That's the normal amount, nothing. My son fell asleep at a wheel going back about 10 years ago and hit a Telstra pole, the thinner Telstra poles, and damaged it and had to be replaced. How much do you think that cost?
1,000 or 2,000.
Yeah, something like that, Peter. Now, how come that happened? And the answer is because when he hit the pole, the police reported it. When the car hits a tree, what do you think the police do?
They don't care. It's only a tree.
Just a tree. Just a tree. And that's the dilemma that we're facing. We really need to get better at valuing a tree. What we should be doing instead of tree risk assessments is tree valuations everywhere. And people finding some reward or some compensation for having trees. I've always of the view that in a perfect world, and it was first proposed by a madman called Bailey Hudson, and Bailey said, if you could somehow or other make people that have trees get a discount on their car registration, and people that don't pay more on their registration to offset the fuel use, you'd find people all of a sudden being worried about their trees. Because, they're going to save $300 because they had a nice tree in their yard. All of a sudden, that would start to become a decision-making process. At the moment, that's not the case. So we're a long way from that.
But Mark, there was a presentation at TreeNet last year about a rural area in Victoria where they're linking rates and discounts in rates to tree planting on private residences.
And that's wonderful. And that's where we should be, not just in a small little rural area of Victoria.
Well, I can't remember where it was, but it was really fantastic. And the guy that instigated it with the council had come from the finance sector.
Yeah, look, it makes even more sense when you come to somewhere like Blacktown, which is where I live, Blacktown Council. No, I love my local council. I'm not critical of them for the sake of it. But, we hit a wonderful canopy cover of 13%. I live in Shanes Park, ignoring the new national park that's just been created in Shanes Park, the very first predator-free national park. Ignoring that big block of land, Shanes Park has about 6% vegetation cover, and about 1% of that 6% is on my property. It just amazing that then they say, let's go do an inventory of trees and see what our trees are like, rather than saying, let's do an inventory of where we can plant trees, because the value of those trees is phenomenal.
Sorry, Mark, is there any work being done around new estates that you know of with regulations about how many trees they need to plant, things like that?
Yeah, look, there is this.
I can answer that question.
Yep.
At the moment in New South Wales, the government is trying to get developers to achieve a 30% tree cover. But that's only happening in public reserves. When it comes to street tree plantings, their footprint, which is around 340 to 430 square metres, doesn't allow enough soil volume for any sort of reasonable street trees. So at the moment, there's an argy-bargy between the Department of Planning, who's letting the developers pretty well have their own way, the Department of the DPE, who's been handed millions of dollars to spend in Western Sydney for street tree planting, and the councils that need to be able to change their DCPs to increase soil volumes for trees, because the impact on infrastructure means most trees are living between 8 to 10 years before they're removed. That's their lifespan, usable lifespan.
Yeah, that's Derek Williams, guys. Those of you who couldn't pick up his voice or don't know Derek, Derek's a TMO out at, I'm assuming TMO is the right title, out at Penrith City Council. Yeah, look, it's a nightmare to try and resolve it. What is interesting is this concept of Pareto's principle, or getting the bulk of the return of a canopy being set at 30%, was done by a guy called Tepper, and I've told you before, and I'll keep on reminding you, 1896, he suggested we need to get to 30%. And as I said, we've gone backwards in Blacktown 4% in the last decade or thereabouts. So, and I can tell you now, last year in the US, every person I spoke to in their city, it's the same issue. It's US wide. Every time I speak to people in the UK, it's UK wide. So this is a global problem. We know that we've got the sweet spot that we should attempt to reach, and then there's no planning to reach it. You know, we've got these really good, ambitious programs, and I know Derek's been involved with some of them. He may be able to share the success of it, but you know, we see hundreds and thousands and millions of trees planted in Sydney each year, and then we see at least 50% of those gone, as he says, within the next decade. And we see beautiful street tree plantings when all of a sudden the tree's getting large enough, and that's probably not wise choice of trees. You know, you've got a narrow verge and you put something like Crimbia maculata in. Waterhousia floribunda is the flavour of the month at the moment, and they don't get big. The one down at Botanic Gardens is only 1.5 metres in diameter. I mean, that's not big. Trunk diameter, that'll fit in a 400 mil wide opening. So as soon as the gutter or the road or the footpath gets damaged, the next thing is the trees on the chopping block. Rather than, again, being creative and saying, look, you know, we've got to deal with having that sort of infrastructure damage and accept that, you know, maybe we don't even need a gutter there. Maybe that when the tree roots are big enough, we can just let water flow past and catch up material by itself. So does that answer the thing on how we deal with that? Disclaimers. I wanted to discuss disclaimers and then we're going to call it a night. Is it wrong to have a disclaimer? And my answer is no, perfectly fine. In most cases, do we need them? Why have we got them there?
Well, I think you should look at how many times people are prosecuted
Or litigated.
And so if you have a disclaimer, then you're trying to protect yourself against that litigation. But if the litigation almost never or never happens, then what's the point?
Well, yeah, and I think you're trying to protect yourself against litigation. I think the other thing you're trying to do, and I think it's important, is to communicate certain limits and certain comments. And I think that can be done in the report by communicating better in the report rather than, you know, I've just done a risk assessment, but trees can fall at any time. Well, you know, I think that's something you need to be able to express. So, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again, in schools, one of the things that we tell the school is that if we've assessed the trees correctly, tree parts are going to fall. Trees are going to occasionally fall. Property damage will almost certainly occur. Rarely will anyone get hurt. That's the nature of having a tree, isn't it? And so rather than saying, you know, there's a limit to what we can see and blah, blah, it's just being upfront about it and saying it the way that it is. I don't think there's any other way. And I cite here, and there's a little thing there, the Case Wood v. Mercedes. You can go and download it. If you can't find it, Peter will send an email to Peter and he'll share it on the resources folder. But essentially, Turner does some pretty unusual things. And that really leaves him exposed to litigation. The other thing is, and we're all as bad, I'm as bad, trying to communicate this risk stuff in a way that courts understand is difficult. Because you're dealing with natural prejudices, you're dealing with natural opinions. So it doesn't matter even what you say. Eventually someone's going to say, but why? And you should have. And in reality, I question how often we should have. In fact, Melbourne, Rob, you're down in Melbourne, aren't you?
Yeah.
A young lass was hurt last year at Flemington races at Melbourne Cup. Big tree limb fell and broke a vertebrae. She'll never walk again on probability. And so the question is, what makes negligence there? And in the case of Bridget Wright, it took 6 months or so for the coroner to come out and say, well, nothing you could do was going to prevent it. It was an unavoidable incident. The arborist that inspected that tree and did the report for the department after it had failed, he, a very good arborist, and I think he did a good job. And then he picked up that there was bees, there was phallinus, there was cavities, there was dead branches, some overextended branches, whatever they are, picked up all these things. And it's interesting that it didn't fail from any of those things. It failed from a thing called ray attack. And I'm really good at picking ray attack up now after the event. It's covered in the body language of the encyclopedia, the body language of trees, and I can show you what it looks like. Where are we? Sorry. ray attack occurs when the grain rotates 90 degrees from what it should be at the junction. And I can tell it after it's failed. That's useful, isn't it? Why am I not getting that? That's single T. No, it's not. Oh, I'll find you one. I saw one earlier on. Does anyone know what I'm talking about when I talk about ray attack?
Not really.
No.
Yeah, good. That I definitely do need to find one. Oh, here we are. Okay. This is ray attack. This grain is split almost like you could split at the junction in sheets. That is, instead of the rays coming out at 90 degrees, they've rotated. Normally a ray would, let me go open up a Word document, see if I can just sketch it. Okay, so if we're looking at a round log, insert shape, draw freehand, well, we'll just draw. Okay, we've got a log. Where are our rays going to be in that?
You'd expect some to grow radially, so from the center out.
Yeah, so now let's paint them white. Yeah, so they're going to go from the center out and go that way. Yep. So our rays should have been going that way, and they're going to go up and down. So that is, if we were talking about here, they'd go up and then into the center. They've got some height to them. At the junctions, they, for whatever reason, occasionally twist around 90 degrees. And when we get a split firewood, we split it along the ray, don't we?
Hmm.
Imagine if that ray, instead of going like that and down, so we can split it down, imagine if it went sideways instead. 90 degrees to what it is. We'd be able to snap that branch in half fairly easily. If we had a whole pile of rays that were flat, imagine something like oak with its big rays. If they were 90 degrees, then that would give us problems. And in fact, that's what's happening at the junctions. And after it fails, you can pick it. And that's just so useful for nothing.
Hmm.
So what causes that?
We don't know. Matic only described it about 5, 6, 7 years ago. And I know of no way of determining it beforehand. So I don't know how to answer that, Rob. It just happens. I think a part of it is trying to get sorry, let me close this. And so trying to get tissue up and around and over the top of a branch junction is difficult for the tree. It's easier to run tissue from the underside. If you're a gymnosperm, that's really good and efficient because compression wood's on the underside as well. What we do know, and it was a change from the early days, is no tension wood is close into the trunk. It's further out. And the anatomical center on a wound is almost always higher up. So we would have cut off. Now this was a co-dominant stem on this one, by the looks of it. But you can see it's all sheeted the wrong way. And it happens regularly. And it just means it's more prone to split there. Does it mean it's going to split? We should remove everything that, if we could detect it with our ray tachometer, should we remove them all? The answer is no. It just means it happens. So the thing that killed Bridget, and I'll actually show you the limb. Let's see if I go Picktown. No. Yeah, so it's definitely what happened in the case of Bridget Wright. It failed. If they'd reduced the limb, would there have been less likelihood of it failing? Yeah, probably. Should you reduce every limb on every tree? Probably not. It seems to be a rather expensive process. Just one of those freaky things. And the other thing you can get is you can get cavities on the top side of a branch. Has anyone ever seen that?
Yep.
Yep. And if that's in near the trunk, like we get with bird damage, and I think I should be able to pull up bird damage, hopefully. Yeah, they're not great shots. So this starts to decay away. And you end up with a cavity there. The tree's putting down new wood on the bottom. Let me make that a bigger shot. Yeah, the tree's putting new wood on the bottom here. And so who cares about what's happening on the top? And it's not uncommon to find a tree with lots of prop tissue on the bottom, and it's dealing with it. I think I should be able to do prop tissue. Yeah, there we are. There's one of my favorite trees for doing it. So the anatomical center of this branch is about here. All of this is prop tissue. That's more wood, normal wood, no tension wood. Tension wood starts out about here somewhere, if it's there at all. And not all angiosperms have tension wood. We used to think they did. And some angiosperms produce compression wood, and that just screws with me totally. And which ones do what, we don't know. And to make it worse, even within the genus Eucalyptus, we have some that produce tension wood, others that don't. None of them producing compression wood. So I've just given up. What is great is this tree is dealing with it in the right way, and that is it's putting stuff on the underside and strengthening itself up. And so it's got a great job. Same thing happening here is this little ridge here says to you that the tree's figured out the easiest way to strengthen up a shelf coming out from the wall is to put a bracket underneath. Putting an elastic band on the top does not help. Okay, so tension wood helps when you get further out. And I can tell you this, we don't really understand how tension wood works yet. Part of that is no one really wants to research it from a forestry point of view. It's scrap. It's waste product. One of the things that appears to be the case, though, because it's a gelatinous mass, a wall S2 gets altered to become this gelatinous mass, is that it's more flexible. And it may be that tension wood allows for increased movement without breakage. Okay. So disclaimers. Yes, look, I understand why they're there, and I'll make one comment, and that is, I think if you're going to use a disclaimer at some stage or other, when you're doing a legal project somewhere, sitting down and having a chin wag with the legal team about your disclaimer, just to see what they think and what suggestions they can have, is probably a smart move. In other words, if you're going to try and rely on it, it should be well written. There is a disclaimer out there, and I can pull it up if you want. I think we shared it earlier on once in War. There's 7 lines long, 1 sentence, and I don't know what they're saying. It's so confusing. Your disclaimer, if it's going to try and do that purpose of giving you some protection, should be clear. I say communicate in the first place more reliably. So, this is what I'm doing. I'm looking at one tree. I'm looking at this point of time. I inspected it from the ground. I didn't do an aerial inspection. There was nothing there that merited an aerial inspection being done. And when the branch falls and hits little Johnny, pretty unlikely, but it has, and now you're before a judge, Andrew, you say, well, I said what I did. There was no reason to believe that I needed to do an aerial inspection. Or, I made a call, and this is why I made that call. And then the great news is, let's be honest, we've all got insurance. Not saying we're going to get negligent, but how many arborists do you guys know of personally who have been successfully sued and they had their insurance claim? And I can tell you of one I know of. He got out to do a palm prune. He might have done probably a block of hash before he started to do the tree. And as he climbed up with the spikes to prune it, and he started knocking them off, all of a sudden he realized that he wasn't taking the tree down. He'd forgotten that he was pruning it and not taking it down. And by then he'd done everything except take the top out. And he got sued, or his insurance company got sued for about $12,000 because he was a stoner. That's the only one I know of that's been successfully done in my lifetime where I've known them.
But that's a public liability thing rather than a professional indemnity one, isn't it?
The same process though, Rob, of you'd have to be damn stupid and stoned in most cases to leave yourself exposed. And most of us, you know, if you said there's absolutely no chance that this tree will ever fall over, I think that would be a fairly brash statement as an arborist to make. Would you agree?
Mm.
This tree will definitely die. That might be a silly thing to make. It appears though, you know, on all balance of probabilities, this tree will die. And it's just about communicating more effectively than what we are.
I think you could confidently say that this tree will die, Mark. It's just a matter of when.
Oh, yeah. And this tree will fall over. Sure. Unless it's cut down beforehand, eventually that's going to happen. But yes, precisely, Peter.
Mm.
I think we have a paranoia about things. So guys, I would encourage you, if you're going to use a disclaimer, just check to see what you can take out of that disclaimer that you don't need to be there. And one of the reasons I say that is it's often when I read a report and then I get to the end and I see the disclaimer, it almost like the disclaimer says, everything I said, I don't actually have any confidence in. So don't take it, just take it as a, you know, as a thing, but no, don't hold me to any of it. It's just something that I've written. Whereas when you don't need a disclaimer, it really is saying, look, this is the position, as I said, and I'm happy to hang my insurance on it. I don't need to be worried about it. And the likelihood that I'll get sued in my lifetime is fairly small. The likelihood that any of us that are on the line today are going to get sued is fairly small. Does anyone know anyone else that's been sued for stupidity or negligence? It takes a fair bit.
Mm.
And I've got to tell you, I think there are a lot of stupid consulting arborists out there. Can we agree with that?
Oh, yes.
Some of the things I read, I sit there and think definitely stoned when they were writing. And in fact, I've got one at the moment, and I cannot believe that it was actually tendered as court evidence. Now, don't take the wrong way, I screw up, and next time round, we'll look at legal reports in a bit more detail, and I'll share with you a screw up that I recently made. Fortunately, I wasn't the only party that screwed up. The solicitor screwed up as well. But you'll see how, again, making mistakes is not the end of the world. Making mistakes is the learning process we need to go through. And Andrew, you've got kids, haven't you? Yep.
One kid, yes.
How old?
Sorry?
How old?
2 years old.
2 years old. So when they were learning to walk and they fell over, you pick them up and you beat the crap out of them and said, don't ever do that again.
No, you learn a lot more from failure.
And yet here we are still as a profession, really liking to go out there and beat people up for making mistakes rather than saying, hey, look, that's a real screw up. You know, what do you get from that? How do you learn and move forward? And hopefully I try and do that more often than I beat up. But, you know, as you get older, it's easier to be paranoid about making mistakes, and it's easier to criticize because of the mistakes.
I don't know about that. It's easier to worry about falling over.
It is. It's a lot easier to worry about falling over, Peter. And I was looking at the mortality figures for that the other day, and it's definitely an age-based problem. So you and I should probably not be out consulting anymore. We should probably stay at home, and no driving between the hours of 2 and 4 p.m. Our risk, both you and I, start coming into a higher risk of having an accident at that time. Apparently we need our little grandpa naps.
Yep.
I don't get them yet, but our body tells us that we do need them. So guys, I'll see you.
I have something that I'd like to share with you before everybody goes. So these Zoom sessions, these war and tip sessions, have been approved by the ISA to be awarded 1 CEU per session. So if you want to be a registered consulting arborist, you need to collect 12 CEUs a year. And so that's now available for anyone that wants them. What we need to do is keep a record so that we can actually award you them. And I don't have your full name details from what I'm seeing from these Zoom sessions. So I would ask you, if you would like to collect a CEU from the session, let me know.
Yeah, now there is a way, and I'm not sure how to do it, Peter, but I can't see Derek's because he's quietened down and not got a video going, but there is a way of displaying everyone who's on the call. I just
yeah, but not everybody's got their full name.
Oh yes, of course. And then we've got silly people like Niels Carlsen.
And also there may be some people who are attending the sessions but have no interest in collecting CEUs. So
yep.
I think,
oh yeah, I see it in participants. So in participants, perhaps if you want it, and Niels Carlsen.
Oh yes, I do see it. Yeah.
Arborman. I don't know who Arborman is, but maybe Mona. I can guess who Mona is. And Lachlan's iPhone. I don't know that iPhone's a valid surname anymore. I think it's covered by a trademark. So perhaps if you want to grab it, you might want to look at that. Otherwise, if you don't come up as being there, so Rob Murray, we know who you are. Mark Fay, we know who you are. But some of the others, if your log on is unclear, you may want to just email Peter so that he can get that. And if you want this, the CEU, then please.
But certainly, if you'd like a CEU and you'd let me know, then I will definitely be able to organise it.
I would like them, Peter.
Yep.
Yep.
I don't think that it's reasonable to issue them retrospectively, but we can certainly do it from now on.
That's great.
What details do you need?
Just your name.
Yep.
And probably your contact. But I should theoretically have your email contact, but yeah.
Can I make a suggestion? Just when you log into the session, if you can send Peter an email saying I am Abroman. Sorry, I thought it was Arborman, but it's not. It's Abroman. I'm Abroman. This is who Abroman is. Then Peter can check it both ways. You can see that yes, you are on, and yes, you are there. I know Derek, goes off and has dinner and has a sleep and then comes back. That's why he doesn't have video on. Is that right, Derek?
No, it's because I'm ugly.
In which case, I should have my camera off. I think it is off.
So, I mean, I think that there are some limitations for this system, but I just want to keep it reasonably easy to manage and keep it reasonably responsible. So, we use the system sensibly.
Yep, sounds great. And I mean, it's nice to see that even in a more informal form of education is being accepted. It's great.
Yeah, thanks to you guys for doing this. It's a great resource for nothing, to be able to jump on and just hear people have an open discussion about these sorts of things. It's great.
We're glad to be here. And Mark, both Peter and I are going to die at some stage in the next 20 years or so, and we don't want to die leaving behind all the things that people have helped us with. And so this is just a chance to give back and hopefully see things improve. And hopefully, every now and again, something out of one of these sessions sits there for you, Mark, and you say, oh, it's a great idea. I like that. That works for me. And if that happens, just 10% of the time over a period of 2 or 3 years, we'll have had some impact.
Yeah, definitely.
We enjoyed every time.
Is there any paper or anything on the ray attack that you can recommend?
Can you, Mark, send me I'll send Peter an email and I'll at least pull the section out of his textbook that illustrates it well. and go
Yes.
over that in a little bit more detail. And no, it's Klaus Matic, Ben Klaus, and if he hears this, I know he likes big caliber firearms, so I'm sorry. But he's a physicist first, and not an arborist. So these things often come through slowly. And it's the same with Lothar Wesley and his statics. That was out in the early 2000s, and it took 15 years before it sort of got to the broader European arborist, and it's still tree statics is still very much not known in Australia. It's still not very much accepted.
Did you say it was in Body Language of Trees?
It's in his Encyclopedia of the Body.
Oh, right. Okay.
White one that's about, I don't know what it is now. It's about $300.
No, I don't know that one.
But it's a wonderful text. What he did so he did the Body Language of Trees. It's a technical book. Hang on a second. I've got a copy of it. Can you see the screen at all?
No.
No, we've still got your screen up, Mark.
Yeah, stop sharing. Okay, so this is the book, The Body Language of Trees, and it's a hard read.
You're still blacked out.
Oh, am I?
Yeah.
Oh.
But yes, I know them in the Amenity Tree series.
I don't know why I'm blacked out. Oh,
Camera's not on.
yeah, my camera's not on. There we are. Sorry, I apologize. Now that's it's blurring
Yeah,
out.
there we go. Yep, that's it.
So that's a nice little book, but then there's the new encyclopedia, which is a white textbook. It's about 3 times that thickness, where he uses lots of illustrations and lots of images to try and communicate the matter more clearly. And between this first text and the second text, a whole pile of things have changed. So he's picked up things that observationally he thought was correct, and he's come back and said, no, okay, I got that wrong.
How recent is the encyclopedia? Because Body Language is 94, isn't it?
Yeah, so I think about 2014 or 2013, something like that.
Wow.
2014. Hang on, I just included a report. So 2014, I'm pretty sure. In fact, I'll give it to you exactly.
Yeah, guys, if you look at your screens, Vicky's been holding it up to show.
Sorry, Vicky.
Oh,
There we are. Yep.
nice one, Vicky.
So, Vicky, you agree it's a much improved edition in terms of clarity of communication? Oh, she's got a microphone off.
Yeah, it's really fantastic book.
Yeah, a lot better communication than his early one, and it's an idea of a good law process. I was in a case a few years ago, and we talked about that as a textbook, and both the senior counsel and junior counsel grabbed a copy, and one of them gave me a call. This is December. One of them gave me a call in January and said, "I finished reading that now. Let's have a discussion." And I thought, arborists don't want to read it at all. And here I've got a barrister who sat down and read from cover to cover so he could understand it. And that's pretty good commitment. So, it's nice. It is written as a book where you don't have to go through everything all at once. It's a little bit more like a Stupsy where you can just pick bits and pieces and go through. Not quite as Stupsy-ish, but it's a lot better communication than the Body Language of Trees as such. And as I said, it's corrected so many of those things and redefined things. So what was fiber buckling is now fiber kinking, and so on and so forth. So yeah, and it's a lot cheaper because the Body Language of Trees out of print, and you'll see
find it.
Every now and again. I think that even might be a spare one that I just pulled out.
I'll buy it off you. I've only got it on PDF, that one.
If you've got it as a PDF, that's great.
Yeah.
I'll do you a trade and buy. You can pay if it is a spare. Mark, will you email me and I'll?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I keep my eyes out for those sort of things. That every now and again, a bookshop will have it there, and you think, gonna grab that.
Best I got was Raven Plant Biology for $5 from the local tip shop. It's about a $200, $300 textbook.
Yeah, they're out there. I bought a rare collectible the other day. It's not great condition, but certainly at a price that I thought was criminal, and I couldn't say anything to the bookshop about it. No, it's in bad condition. Yeah, okay. So yeah, there's some great things out there. So yeah, definitely worth having. It is still a grind to get from front to back, but a lot more readable than the original text.
Mm.
Okay, thanks guys.
Lovely. Thanks very much, guys.
Cheers.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Mark.